in the world does that have to do with Black History Month? What does it say to us today? And that's what we want to talk about this morning. This is the month that the Disciples of Christ Church designates as African American History Month. Other denominations, as I said earlier, call it Black History Month. But we have had, as disciples, such a wonderful heritage of African Americans here in America that have contributed so faithfully to our own faith tradition that we refer to, designated as African American History Month. But either way, it's fitting to recognize one of the greatest Black Americans, American preacher who ever preached the Word of God, Dr. Martin Luther King. Dr. King was an extraordinary man. He was a prophet of God, and he was a servant in this kingdom here and now, and his life literally changed a nation. As far as we have come from those shameful days of the Jim Crow time, there is still a long, long way to go. Dr. King's dream of racial equality, like that of Amos, who we read, remains largely unfulfilled. There's a story told of an old Irishman who was critically ill, and the family called the priest because it was time, and the priest, in the preparation for these last rites, asked the obvious and expected question. O'Reilly, he asked, do you desire to renounce the devil and all of his works? And O'Reilly was fully conscious, thought about it for a minute, and he says, well, Father, frankly, considering the condition I'm in, I'd rather not antagonize anybody. The children of Israel were having a tough time. And given the conditions that they were in, they couldn't afford to antagonize anybody either, especially God. But they did. Amos the prophet pleaded with them to return to God because he said they had abandoned God and the covenant that they had with God. And they performed religious rituals at holy shrines. And they bragged about how righteous they were. They lived in luxury. They took bribes. They cheated the poor. And in ignorant arrogance, they longed for the day of the Lord. And Amos told them, that day for you will be darkness, not light. It will be as though a man fled from a lion and ran right into a bear. Though you bring burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Let justice roll down like a river and an ever-flowing stream. The people at that time complained that life isn't fair. Not a lot different from today, is it? And they said, God speaks of justice, but there is no justice for us. We are his people, they thought, but he rains sorrows on our heads. In April 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King was serving a sentence for participating in the civil rights demonstration in Birmingham, Alabama. 8 prominent liberal Alabama clergymen, all white, published an open letter in early January that called on Dr. King to allow the battle for integration to continue, but to do so in the local courts. Really hadn't had a lot of luck. And in the federal courts. And they warned that Dr. King's nonviolent resistance would have the effect of creating civil disturbances. You see, Dr. King wanted these white ministers to see that the meaning of Christian discipleship was at the very heart of the African American struggle for freedom, justice, and equality. And Dr. King was also being criticized as an outsider, coming in as an agitator, stirring up trouble here in Birmingham when he ought to stay back in Atlanta. But King reminded them and us of so many things that Amos had tried to bring to his people so many years before. Dr. King pointed out that he was in Birmingham because there was injustice there. It was, he said, like the prophets in the 8th century who left their little villages and they carried their message of just saith the Lord far beyond their local boundaries. And they did that because they had a message, the same message that Dr. King had, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Think of that. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And King reminded his antagonists, just like Amos did, that history has a long and a tragic story of the fact that the privileged groups in society seldom give up their privileges voluntarily. He asserted that for years now, I have heard the words wait. That word rings in the ear of every Negro with a piercing familiarity. This wait almost always meant never. He said we must come to see what a distinguished jurist of yesterday who had said that justice too long delayed is justice denied. Think today how long our country has been ignoring current racial issues and immigration issues. Justice too long delayed is justice denied. And for us today, one of the most important messages in the letter that I am using as a resource for this sermon is a letter from the Birmingham jail by Dr. King. And he proposed that the biggest single stumbling block to the freedom of Negroes was not the active segregationists, but it was the white moderate who was more devoted to order than they were to justice. Those who live by the myth of time and who constantly advise the Negro to wait until a more convenient season. King eloquently advised his people that the time is always right to do the right thing. Today, the time is always right to do the right thing. Now is the time, he said, to make real the promise of democracy and transform our national policy from the quicksand of racial injustice to the solid rock of human dignity. Does any of this have a ring of familiarity about the here and now? About the issues that we either confront or don't confront about race relations in our country? About immigration issues, and even issues about sexual orientation. We need now, at this time in our life, to accept Dr. King's premise of the urgency of now. You know, there was a time in my life when most of you wouldn't like me at all. I was an extremely racist, sexist person. And growing up, I was racist, and I didn't even know about it as a young boy. My grade school was segregated, but didn't mean anything to me. That was just natural. I never even gave it a thought. Then when I was in junior and senior high school, I attended schools that were integrated. And that was in Topeka, Kansas. And so I was not aware that there was a segregation issue. And ironically, Topeka, Kansas is the location of the Brown v. Board of Education Supreme Court decision outlawing segregation in the public schools. And we were segregated, and I didn't even know it. I didn't know until I attended my 50th high school reunion that my black friends who I walked to school with and played football and basketball with could not go to our proms and our dances at school.